This is Rabbi Ben Schaefer of the Shmooze.com. Jewish adulting is about shining a light on parts of ourselves in order to do Avodas Hashem with all the tools and resources at our disposal. It is an honor and a privilege to have every day to further refine our character and grow closer to Hashem. Take advantage of these opportunities before it's too late.
Hello, everybody. This is your host of the Jewish Adulting Podcast, Chedva Rose. I'm here with me tonight with a very special guest, Rabbi Mordechai Becher. Rabbi Becher is originally from Australia, is an instructor at Yeshiva University, previously taught at Neve, Yerushalayim, and Somayach, has presented internationally and at the popular Gateway Seminar for over 20 years. He is a scholar in residence for Legacy Kosher Tours. He received smicha, holds a master's in medieval Jewish history, and is a doctoral candidate. And if you're not impressed, he also served in the IDF. Rabbi Becher has answered thousands of questions on AskTheRabbi.org. He presents a Talmud class, Dimensions of the Daf. Rabbi Becher's latest book, which is fantastic, is called Gateways to Judaism. I learned it with all my chavrusas. It's published by Artscroll, and it's in its 10th printing. He has taught internationally and leads tours in exotic locations around the world. And that is just I feel like a tip of what we have here for people to understand, a little bit more about you. So thank you so much for being on here with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I wanted to, sometimes I have an idea about what I want the speaker to speak about. Generally, it makes sense because they have different subject matters that people are experts in. And I ask them, can you speak on your subject matter? And sometimes there's just people who have such a breadth and of knowledge and understanding and just that they can really talk on whatever they feel is important. So when I asked Rabbi Becher, what is a topic that for the Jewish adult is important in this day and age, the first thing that Rabbi Becher said was the Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, the concept of feeling the pain of our brothers and sisters in Israel. And so can you talk a little bit more about why this topic was the one that you just jumped to automatically?
Okay. Well, when you talk about adulting, the first thing that came to my mind is that the child, the infant, the child is basically focused on themselves. There's nothing bad about that. They're kids. The infant wakes up, cries middle of the night, hungry, thirsty, etc. They don't think to themselves, mum's tired, right? Let's give her a break. No, they just think, I'm hungry, I want. Part of maturity is expanding one's consciousness outside of the self, to think about other people, as people, not just as providers of services for moi, right? And therefore, and in our current situation, I felt that as a mature Jewish adult, it's incumbent upon every single Jew to expand their consciousness and to think about other Jews who are in, whether it's most obviously the hostages, the soldiers, the families of the hostages, the families of the soldiers, the thousands of people who have been evacuated from their homes in the north and in the south, and all the people who have experienced trauma and as a result of the missile attacks and so on and so forth. I don't think that we should be going on in continuing in our regular life without thinking about this. I don't know about continuously, but thinking about this regularly. And obviously, one of the other reasons this is the first thing that came to my mind is that I have 3 children and children's in-law, whatever, right, and grandchildren living in Israel. I have 2 sons who are serving in the army. One is currently in Gaza. The other's unit was released a few weeks ago. And it is something which is on my mind continuously for very personal reasons. But I think it should be on every Jew's mind for national reasons. We are, as you introduced by saying, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze B'Zeh, responsible one for the other. In the words of one of the Rishonim, one of the medieval Jewish scholars of Spain, the Ritva, Reb Yontov ben Alashvili, he says, Kol Yisrael keguf echad hem. The Jewish people are like one entity, one body. And that's very central, very central.
Right. So, I would say that I'm following the news in Israel in both a personal, my sister lives in Israel, so I hear from her how rough it is and how the whole country has PTSD. I cried when October 7th happened. Every time I hear of another soldier that dies or another pagua that happens or whatever, it hurts. But then I also look at it as a sort of a protection that I maybe back up a little bit and not spend too much time and too invested for the sake of my own mental health. And then I also wonder, what could I possibly do more, and what is my obligation to do more, and what's not being done? So where do you see there possibly being a gap in the way that the American Jews or the Jews around the world possibly are not as invested in the pain of those in Israel?
Well, as to your first point, which is your own mental health, that's clearly extremely important, and that's a priority. And I agree that it's not reasonable to expect people to be continuously walking around, tears in their eyes, etc. You are correct. And there has to be a balance. Not so easy to find the balance, but there should be a balance. And the Torah does recognize psychological needs as authentic needs. The Torah does recognize normal human emotion never as a sin. Normal human emotional response, meaning I'm overwhelmed, I've got to get away from this, or I'm very angry, etc. That's not a sin. So if you feel that you need to back off a bit and not look at the news today, because I need to focus on myself, my spouse, my children, whatever it is, that's reasonable. That's normal human response. That's apropos of the first thing you mentioned. Where are we falling short, which I believe was the second point that you mentioned? What can we do? So in terms of what we can do, number one, in terms of prayer, tefillah. By the way, I'm using English because I don't know who the audience is, and I'm guessing that some people may be more comfortable with English or Hebrew, but so yes. Yeah,
I'm your typical audience member, so
okay.
Whatever assumptions and judgments you're probably right about, then you could talk to how you would normally talk to someone like me.
Yeah. The truth is, I do tend to usually translate it, but that's fine. Yeah. But when it comes to our prayers, I don't think there's just a fascinating idea that the Gemara in Brachos says that a person should always pray in a room with windows. And one of the commentaries, Rabbi Shmuel Strasson, who is a wealthy businessman in Vilna, but also a great Torah scholar, and has a commentary printed in the back of the Talmud. He points out that in Vilna, this great city of Jewish scholars and so on, the two of the largest synagogues, one did not have windows, and the other, the windows were too high to see out of. So he says, how is it that in Vilna we are ignoring the Gemara? And he quotes a responsum of the Rambam, Maimonides, who says that the rule of the Gemara, you need windows, only applies if you're praying home alone. If you're in a shul, you don't need the windows. Now, Code of Jewish Law says we do have windows in the shul, we do need windows, customary to have 12, like the tribes of Israel, and so on. But How do you understand Maimonides? Maimonides is saying it's only if you're home alone praying, davening, right, that you need windows. So Rav Kook explains in his commentary on the Siddur, it's called Oilas Re'iyah. Rav Kook explains, you know why you need windows? So that when you daven, you look out the window and you realize there's a world out there. I should not just be thinking of myself and my own interests. The window helps me be aware of others. Now, according to Rav Kook's explanation, Maimonides makes perfect sense. If I'm at shul, there's other people around. Of course, I'm thinking of other people. If I'm davening alone at home, then I need the windows because I need something to remind me that there's other people out there. And I think our prayers, I believe, are effective. They're also effective for keeping things in my consciousness. And I can tell you that soldiers and families in Israel, knowing that we are praying for them is important. And they have told me, we know you've got our back, right? And that's the fact that we do pray for people, the fact that they are aware that we are doing that, I think is very important and effective, both in terms of the morale of people in Israel, and also in terms of our own emunah, our own belief, our own trust in God, and so on and so forth. So that's number one. And, it may be, if you can personalize it, if you have a list. I know that, for example, I live in Passaic, New Jersey. So we have a list of, the shuls put out a list of soldiers from Passaic who are serving in Israel. So we have their names. So I know a lot of people, it's not that we're only praying for the soldiers from Passaic. We don't care about the others, but it does, if it's more personal, it is helpful in terms of my intention, in terms of my sincerity, so on and so forth. I think opportunities communal-wise, for example, to say there's a beautiful prayer, the Mishaberach for Tzahal. It was a Mishaberach for the IDF, so composed by the chief rabbi of the army a while back, Rabbi Goren. It's a beautiful prayer. It's very simple and elegant, and it's very moving. And I think one should be saying that, whether I can't change communities, but I think I don't see why a shul would not be saying that. It's not political, not going for a particular party. You're praying for our soldiers, right? People tell me, yeah, it's an innovation. We don't add prayers. Yes, we do. Prayers have been added for centuries. Yom Kippur was added in Babylon. Brishmei is from the Zohar. Kaddish was added later on. We have Mishaberachs for people who don't speak in shul. We have a Mishaberach for people who fast on Monday, Thursday, Monday. We have Mishaberachs for, right? And I know that when someone says, goes up, gets called up, and there's a Mishaberach for a sick person, the Gabbai doesn't ask them, is this sick person religious? Does he have a tattoo? No one asked that. No one asked that. But same is true with the Mishaberach. It should be true. Right? We're saying Mishaberach for Jewish soldiers who are defending the land of Israel, the people of Israel, with their lives. So that's, I think, an important point to have those prayers. I know that people do sometimes. It seems too much, but considering what people in Israel are doing and going through, and the soldiers, for me to say a couple of extra paragraphs of Tehillim, or to insert something into my Shemona Esra with people's names and with the soldiers, etc., I think I can deal with that. It's not too much to ask. Not too much to ask. So that's number one. What else can we do? I've got to be frank here. I have been to numerous weddings over the last 10 months. And some of those weddings, before they sing Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, there'll be a prayer for the soldiers. There'll be a prayer for the hostages. They'll say Tehillim. That's beautiful. And that's in keeping with the spirit of raising Yerushalayim over all of our greatest moments of joy. That's why we break the cup. In keeping with that, to remember that there are people who are, in stress, etc. That's really important. And when I'm at those weddings, I feel that, and I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I do not think it detracts from the joy. I don't think it detracts from the wedding. I think it's important for us to remember that. But I have also been to weddings where there's not even a mention. You would not even know that there was a war. you would have no clue that there was anything happening. Right? That bothers me. That bothers me. Right? Just to say, you can't really, not even to say a prayer for the Sadi Kedushin, say to heal him. But how could that be objectionable, right? And that's something which bothers me deeply. And I think there's something, and it means that it's not on our consciousness at all. And that's problematic. So that's in terms of spiritual prayer, etc. What else can we do materially? So many opportunities to help. So many opportunities. I have a friend in Chicago. She has been organizing sponsorship of Shabbat meals for soldiers on bases. Right? That's a meaningful, effective, simple thing to do. There are people in Israel who do that, and I know that my son's base appreciate. He said the food has been terrible in the army, and which is not a surprise. But the food on Shabbat has been even worse. And to get a great catered meal to come to the soldiers is a boost for morale. B, oineg Shabbat, mitzvah of enjoying Shabbos. It's chesed, it's kindness. I mean, it's an amazing thing to do. Right? There are people who have been sending toys and books, etc., for displaced families. Tremendous, right? So there's a lot of things you can do. People who are sending supplies for soldiers. Some guy bought thousands of Cliff Bars. Cliff Bars are gold for soldiers. They have a protein bar which is compact, which lasts forever, and which you can carry in your pocket. Wow, that's great. Right? That's a great thing. So there's a lot of opportunities of that sort. And people are stepping up to this. I know, not everyone, but people are stepping up to this. I know, I'm very proud of our community, but I bought some plates that is ceramic, not plates that you eat off, but ceramic bulletproof plates that they put into the vests. So I bought some for the boys, and so I put out an email. Plates. I need anyone going from New York's area to Israel next few days. Can you take some plates? They're heavy. A person contacted me. She was going for her, I believe it was her son's wedding. Now, you can imagine when someone is traveling to their son's wedding in Israel, I imagine their luggage is pretty full. They're pretty full. This woman said, it'll be my privilege to, I said, they're heavy. They'll take up some room. She said, no, it is my zchut. It is my privilege to take these. Right? She took them, they delivered them. So she was overjoyed that she was able to do that. Right? But that's an area in which we can really contribute in a meaningful way. Right? Whether it's, so that's financial, yes, but it's not always financial. Right?
Is this a nice thing to do, or are we obligated to do it?
That's a great question. It's a great question.
Thank you.
The Torah tells us, and it's a positive commandment of the Torah, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. It means you have to. Now, the Ramban, Nachmanides, in his commentary on that place, it's Vayikra 19, the Ramban says that means you have to want everything you would like for yourself, should want for your fellow Jew. Osher, wealth, nechasim, property, kavod, dignity, chokhmah, wisdom. So that's a positive commandment of the Torah. That's not just being nice, right? These are my fellow Jews, right? If I was in a situation eating cheese sandwiches for 3 weeks, one of my boys did, right? And someone, would I not want a hot, fresh, fantastic meal on Shabbos? Of course I would, right? And if it was your son, daughter on the front lines, and I wanted to send them a more comfortable backpack, right? An Agilite backpack, I'm not advertising, but I wanted to send them a comfortable tactical backpack. I wanted to send, we had I remember having a conversation with my wife. I never thought we'd ever have this conversation. I was going to Israel in July. I've been in Israel twice this summer. I was going in July. My wife is packing the suitcase with all the stuff for our grandchildren, etc. We've got these cushions, which are like my granddaughters love. They're like squishmallows or something. I forgot what they're called.
Yeah.
Right. And my wife says, "Oh, got to be careful. Don't put the squishmallows too close to the tactical vest because the Velcro will rip them." I was like, "Real? Wow." Like, don't put the squishmallows too close to the tactical vest. Like, that's
conversations we never thought we
so. But if it's your own child, you do this, right? And I think every Jew is obligated to think in that way, right? I don't think that's being nice. And it's interesting. I was at a YU Shabbaton this past Shabbos, and I had the privilege of just being there together with 300 students and the Rosh Yeshivas. The Rosh Yeshiva was like an amazing, great experience. So one of the Rosh Yeshivas, Rav Herschel Reichman, brilliant Talmud Chacham, he pointed out, if you look in the Torah, there's a couple of places where the Torah talks about wars. Last week's parasha, the Torah spoke about ki teitzei lemilchama aloyvecha, when you go out to war against your enemy, unasano Hashem elokech b'yadecha, Hashem will give him into your hands. It sounds like a very easy thing. You go out to war, Hashem will give him into your hands. It's like it sounds easy, like a quick war. But then there's another place where it says that Hisavol milchama ba'artzachem, when a war comes into your land, hatzar hatzoreschem, and there is an enemy who is inflicting damage on you. V'haroisem b'chatros, blow trumpets. Pray to Hashem, v'noshatem oiveich, and you'll be safe from enemies. That sounds like a rough, difficult war. He said grammatically, there's a fascinating difference between the two. The easier war, ki teitzei l'milchama al oivecha, singular. Teitzei al oivecha. Unatano Hashem elokecha biyadecha, all singular. The war, which is the rough, difficult, heavy war, hatzar hatzorer etchem, plural. Ki tavo milchama ba'artzachem, plural. Harayotem b'chatzorot, you will blow. He said the difference is the war in which we're plural, it's going to be a rough, difficult war. The war in which it's all in singular, meaning we're united, easier war. And so aside from the mitzvah of love your fellow Jew, you know what? It's also doing these acts of kindness is increasing the unity of the Jewish people, and increasing the unity of the Jewish people is part of the war effort. Literally part of the war effort. The more unified we are, the more successful we will be. Right? We'll move from hatzar hatzorer etchem, the enemy that is afflicting you, plural, to unatano Hashem elokecha biyadecha, Hashem will give it into your hand. Right? So I think it's not just, I think it's necessary. And yeah, I mean, for many reasons. And in terms of tzedakah, there's obviously laws of tzedakah. I'm not paskening here. I'm not a posek, and certainly not your posek. But there are priorities. Obviously, local community has priority. Local community has priority. But one of the important priorities in halacha is support of the Jewish community in the land of Israel. That's something which is a very high priority. Granted, after your family and local poor, but more important than maybe other communities is the land of Israel and the Jews in Israel. So yeah, it's not just being nice, although being nice is also a good thing.
Yeah,
no
sure.
objections. No objections to that. No, as long as people are nice to me. Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I want to respect your time. I do have a lot of questions, but the two that come to mind right now are I saw something in one of our local Jewish magazines, Baltimore Jewish Home, where I wish I could remember who it was, but it made such an impact on me, where it talks about there's this one Hasidic Rav, and at the beginning of the summer, he came out and said, I'm not going on vacation this summer. while my brothers and sisters are at war in the land of Israel.
Yes, I heard.
And yeah, and it was really beautiful because I know from personal experience that for those who have listened to my podcast or know my story, my mother was paralyzed for 15 years, so we were in and out of hospitals. And I would walk around my grocery store and I would be like, why are people still doing normal things? Why are we honking our horns in traffic or dropping our kids off at school? Like, my mother's in the ICU. Don't you know what's happening in my life? Which was obviously clearly irrational, but it sort of felt like things shouldn't just keep going on in the way that they have been going on. Something has to interrupt and sort of, we have to actually do something to not just pay lip service to the fact that our brothers and sisters are in Israel. However, I think that, and this is just kind of, I'm going to sort of like walk real gently in this question. I mentioned it to you when we initially talked that there are those, you see a lot of Achdus is coming about because of the war. You know, there was a lot of that feeling like after 9/11 where people in Israel were just loving on each other and there was no Haredi Chiloni type of mentality. And then the war just kept going and we couldn't make an emergency every day of the situation, because if every day is an emergency, then there's no such thing as an emergency. Like, you can't live in that state of just pure like dread and feeling, and it's just human nature that eventually that goes away. But then even more so when the bonds or the connection between, like you said, you know, no one asked the Misha Baruch if he has a tattoo or if he's religious, but there is a disconnect in the population, specifically in Israel and in America. I mean, what percentage of American Jews disagree with the policies and priorities of the Orthodox community for the land of Israel? So there is a disconnect here. So I'm asking two questions. One is the living day to day and changing the behaviors that we have to sort of reflect that we're in a time of crisis with the land of Israel, like you said, with the wedding. But on a more practical level, like, I don't have weddings coming up, and that's a different, I'm more thinking for general, what can I do besides giving money, obviously, besides davening? I'm saying in terms of, do I have an obligation to not, you know, take my family to Hershey Park? Do I have an obligation to stop living my life in some way to reflect on the situation in Israel? And then on the other hand, with the disconnect between the two camps, if you want to call it, when we're trying to create Achdus, what would you say to that? Because that feels like an adulting topic. That feels like you know, we all have Jewish neshamos, but there must be some sort of guidance that you could give on that topic.
Look, I think it is. Yeah, I did hear about that Rebbe. I also know of another Rebbe who, good friend of mine who's very close, said that since the beginning of the war, this particular Rebbe has not eaten any hot food during the week, except on he only eats on Shabbos. Now, those are both, that's pretty extreme. Although I understand that, you know, there are people who, there were Gedolim who during the 73 war did not sleep on a bed. I mean, and I think you have to balance that with your obligations, as we start at the beginning, to your own mental health, to your family, financial, and so on and so forth. We can't, I don't think it's reasonable to stop living and to stop. But I think it is reasonable to take, to try to accept something upon oneself, which is, it could be small, it could be minor, but it should be significant. So it's very similar to what we try to do during Elul Rosh Hashanah time in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. You know, we try to take on something. It may be something very small, right? To try to take extra care to say hello to people you don't normally say hello to say good Shabbos to someone who, I don't know, total strangers. These are, you know, this is easy stuff, but I think it's significant. Because you're reaching out to another Jew in some way. It may be something more significant. There are all types of organizations in which people are able to learn with Jews who don't know much about Judaism. Whether it's Partners in Torah or Chabad or Shoresh or whatever it is in Baltimore, right? There's a whole range of organizations that people can help, right? I'm not talking about monetary, financial. I'm talking about with, volunteering for a little bit, right? There are many things that we can do, but I think it is actually incumbent to do something. Does it have to be as extreme as the Rebbe who doesn't eat hot food during the week? I don't think so. I don't think, maybe if I was a Rebbe, it would be, but there should be something of that sort.
So like a micro gesture, like even if I say, like when my husband comes home tonight, I'm going to give him a smile. Like, I'm so happy to see you no matter what. And that is going to be for Eretz Yisrael. It's like a micro gesture.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get involved in the marriage, but that's probably true. You do it all the time.
I'm just thinking of like a small thing. Maybe that was a bad example.
Yeah.
usually he walks in, I'm like, you again. But
it could be a neighbor. It could be it could be someone who, I don't know, maybe, someone who you don't have a great relationship with. I think that's really very effective to reach out in that way and to accept upon oneself some activity, some mitzvah, some kindness, something. And micros are, just like microaggression can hurt someone, right? Yeah. So micro kindness can help someone. It's amazing how effective sometimes a smile or a hug. I'm not a hugger, but how effective these things can be. It's a really important thing to do. I know that with kids, there are sometimes writing letters to people. My grandson wrote a beautiful letter in Hebrew to his two uncles who were soldiers. It was like, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. I thought, right. He was not prompted to do it. That's great.
Right.
In America, right, in Texas. But so there are things we can do of that sort. And that will help and keep it on our consciousness. But yeah, look, I do think I'm a proponent of normality, meaning that don't do extreme things. I don't think, right, but you can keep living your life. We do need some level of recreation. We do need to relax. Probably how much relaxation we need is probably exaggerated in the Western world, but we do need that. It's a human need, and I don't think we stop all that. I mean, think of it this way: happiness. To be happy is, I think, important, and the truth is, in almost every area of life, you'll be better at what you're doing if you're happier. You'll be a better spouse, you'll be a better parent, you'll be a better child, sibling, teacher, employer, employee. There's very few areas where being happy will not, maybe if you're an undertaker, but in general, right, just being a happier person. So I'm not against, I don't think we should go around morose and depressed all the time. I think we can help people more if we're happy, help ourselves more if we're happy, and create greater unity through that. So I'm not suggesting taking on something to make myself depressed or in continuous sorrow, but to accept upon myself something which will tangible step. Whether in some cases, if I didn't say Tehillim, I'll say Tehillim. In some cases, maybe it's some learning. Maybe I'll learn about stuff. Maybe reach out to learn with someone. I don't know. There's a range of things that can be done, but I think something small, meaningful.
Right. Okay. And then what about the unity factor when there's such variations in, ways to, it's really difficult to continue to reach out the hand of peace and brotherhood, and get possibly turned away / discouraged that it's, we're just on such different pages. How do you continue to have that connection and appreciation for let's say the other camp?
that is challenging. I do find that challenging, especially if with people who I think are just wandering off the reservation and really don't understand stuff. So that's a challenge. But I think to be persistent and polite and explain my view and do the best you can there. I don't think we should be discouraged. I mean, again, the Talmud says that when it comes to the mitzvah of rebuke, hocheach tochiach, the Torah repeats the verb. The Talmud says the repetition of the verb rebuke is even 100 times. So that means one has to be, one should not be, one should not give up. Rav Nachman of Breslov famously points out that he says you should always seek out the good point in the other person. Try to find what's good in this person. And I'm sure even if it's someone you disagree with deeply, you might be able to find something good. I was talking to a friend of mine who was ranting to me about, actually we're good friends, all we do is rant to each other, but ranting to me about some fund that was collecting money, and it was damaging local, and he felt that it was because it was damaging local funds, it was problematic. But there were these people who are wealthy people who were giving to it because they got a lot of prestige and honor as a result of that. But then at the end he said, but you know what, he says, it's a nice thing in our community that the way you get prestige and honor is by giving charity. He says these wealthy people in our community are not getting the prestige and honor by buying a Rolls Royce or a yacht, etc. How are they getting their prestige and honor? They're giving charity to a cause which I think is not a priority. But you know what? The fact that he was able to, after this lengthy rant against these people, to come up and find a good point, which is very true. That we should be proud of the fact that here these people gain prestige and honor in our community. How? They gave a lot of money to charity, not because they got a Lamborghini. that's so. Rav Nachman says that's a technique to try to find the good, and try to focus on that a bit. He says, and to try to think what is good in this community. What can we learn from them? So that might be a strategy to do that, to try to achieve that unity, even if it's difficult.
Right. And I think this is sort of my last question. I think we've covered a lot, and I'm sure I have a lot more questions. I'm just trying to really hone it in. But one thing that I didn't bring up and hasn't come up, but it behooves me to say something, is there's a part of this whole experience that we're supposed to learn from it, but there's also what can we learn from what is going on in Israel, and what kind of resilience and strength can we take from Torah and our Chachamim that will allow us to continue to live a life that's besimcha, but also that is, compassionate and empathetic. So there's obviously, what would you say about that component of our teachings that help us able to balance those things out?
Yeah, that's not easy at all. In terms of simcha, let me just focus in on that. There's a very interesting expression that the sages use for measurements. When they talk about a level measure, the Talmud refers to it as a midah atzuva. That means a sad measure. A heaped measure is referred to as midah socheket, a laughing measure. So my teacher, Rav Moshe Shapiro, explained that when you are making progress, when you're moving forward, when you have a goal and you're going towards that goal, even if it's painful, even if it's difficult, you will experience happiness. in that progress. You're going beyond the container. Like there's a pasuk, there's a verse we say every day in prayers, Yismach Leiv Mevakshay Hashem, which means happy is the heart of those who seek Hashem. Interesting to note, it doesn't say those who have found, but those who seek. The process of seeking, making progress is the type of thing that will give people great happiness. And, you know, in Israel, when I the past 2 times I visited, I think 3 times in the past, whatever, since the war. So in the hotel, the evacuees, it was depressing. I got to say, it was rough for them, for everyone. I visited one of my sons. He was wounded. He recovered, thank God. But when I visited him in hospital, and you know, that was not a happy place. The happiest group that I encountered were the soldiers, which was really interesting, and maybe it's because they were the ones who had a very clear task in their mind of what to do, that very clear that goals of what they needed to accomplish in this mission, etc., etc., and they were making progress in that in those goals, and that gave them simcha, even in the midst of very difficult conditions. I'm not saying they're walking around with grins on their faces, but there was definitely a feeling amongst the army bases and amongst the soldiers of optimism, and that's something which we can all do, but that involves us having a goal, making progress towards that goal. We're talking about the small steps and to take on certain things to accomplishment goals, and whether it's in kindness, whether it's in unity, whether it's in prayer, whether it's in mitzvahs, etc. But if I feel that if I am making progress, I will be happier. And when I'm happy, I will be better at doing what I'm doing. So it's the opposite of a vicious cycle. It's what would be the term? A gentle, I don't know. It's a positive cycle, right? The more progress I make, the happier I am. The happier I am, the more I'm better at making progress in whatever area. And that's something important. So when when the Jewish people, when we see the Jews are making progress, we're making progress, I think we can feel that type of happiness, and that's an effective way of achieving it through progress.
I really thought you were going to say Amuna, Bitachon. And why are you asking me this question? Don't you know the answer? So I'm glad I didn't lead the witness, so to speak, because that is a much more practical, I mean, obviously, like I said, my audience is my target audience is those who, like me, know about Amuna, grew up with Amuna and Bitachon. And then sometimes we just get caught up in, the realities of day-to-day life, and we need a little bit more practical reminders and actionable steps to get closer to achieve, to sort of have a little bit control over ourselves and the situation. And I think a lot of the things that you talked about tonight are really about actionable steps that we could take from afar. You mentioned so many. I'm not going to review in summation, but to me, what I basically heard was, I'm not helpless, and I don't have to sit on my hands or shut it off. I can open my heart to those in Israel while still protecting myself. But also there's an obligation to do something. Don't just say, "Oh, what a shame. They're going through stuff." And then just be like, okay, like they're in another country. This isn't my, it's not my fight, and these aren't my people, and whatever. You could definitely talk yourself out of really engaging in the pain and the suffering, but also the strength and the resilience that comes from a lot of the people in Israel are really going through a lot, and showing up and adulting in a way that is probably not fathomable to many of us in America.
Superheroes.
Yeah, superheroes.
Lots
So
of superheroes in Israel.
yes. So I just I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, to us. And is there anything that you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to bring up before I let you go?
Uh, you know, we just I would end with one idea. We are in Elul. It is a very widely observed Jewish custom to say as L'David Hashem Ori v'Yish'i during the month of Elul all the way through till end of Sukkot. And that ends with two verses, which I think are very relevant. Lulei ha'emanti lirot b'tuv Hashem be'eretz ha'chaim. If only I would look and believe in the goodness of Hashem in the land of life, right? And the Gemara actually says what that means is that even if I feel I might not be worthy, but I believe that Hashem has invested in us, trusts us, loves us, and will bring us to the redemption. You know, that's an important part of Elul, is what my Rebbe Shapiro used to talk about, a belief in self. The way the Rambam puts it in his commentary on the Mishnah is that the Jews who survived the desert in 40 years and the ones who were alive at the end, who the decree was over, 40 years decree, they'll die in the desert. Those who are going into Israel, he says, bitchu benafsham, they trusted in themselves. He'eminu ba'atzman, they believed in themselves. Bitchu benafsham, trusted in their souls. Hirgishu ratzon haboreh, they felt the love of God, the desire of God. V'hasarat chamato, and the end of his anger. I think to try to focus on the good things that Hashem has done for us, continues to do for us, to focus on the fact that clearly Hashem has invested so far 3,300 or so years in us. We're type of like the end of that investment. That means he must have, you don't invest unless you're confident. You don't invest unless you have confidence in the industry, in the company, etc. Obviously, God's got confidence in us. We're alive here now, to this day, the end of so much of Jewish history. That means Hashem has invested in us and he believes in us. So it's not just that we believe in God. Emunah is two-way street. God believes in us. And therefore, if I see that, Lulei Ha'emanti, Lulei spells Elul backwards. If I believe in that, what's the end pasuk? Kaveh el Hashem, Chazak v'yamesavecha. You can have hope in Hashem, right? Your strength and good of heart, be strong and good of heart. Kaveh el Hashem, hope in Hashem. The Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lozato, has a beautiful essay called the Drush al Hakivui, the Sermon on Hope, which he says hope is one of the most important words for a Jew. Tikva, hope. He says and that is based on the idea that Hashem believes in us, invests in us, continues to invest in us, wants us to succeed. So I think that's good reason for hope, good reason for optimism, and good reason for a little bit of happiness, and even in this time.
Right. Something that we should keep in mind every day.
Yes.
He has hope in us, we have hope in him, and that is going to allow us to continue to have the emunah that Mashiach is coming and Hashem will take care of us, and we will be here. We were here until now, despite everything. Then we will continue to be here and we will overcome. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
I really
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The views of the hosts do not necessarily equate the views of the guests or vice versa. This podcast is not intended to act as a clinical diagnosis or an authoritative halachic source. Any questions regarding treatment should be directed to your clinician, and any halachic questions should be addressed to your local Orthodox rabbi. We also encourage you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and rate our podcast on iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Your support helps increase visibility and allows us to reach more listeners who can benefit from our wonderful guest speakers.
This is Rabbi Ben-Zion Schaefer of the Shmooze.com. Jewish adulting is about shining a light on parts of ourselves in order to do avodas Hashem with all the tools and resources at our disposal. It is an honor and a privilege to have every day to further refine our character and grow closer to Hashem. Take advantage of these opportunities before it's too late.